Hello, this is Zach from Double Your Freelancing. Today I'm going to walk you through a cold email copy approach for freelancers and agency owners that seems bad at first. Its positive reply rate is about a third of what I'd usually recommend targeting, but it is closing 2 clients a week right now, and it's working better holistically, like in terms of client throughput, clients closed per hour of time spent, etc., than a more reply-oriented copy would have been. And so the core reframe you're going to leave with today is this like mental model for looking holistically at your outreach funnel instead of obsessing over your reply rate and iterating your copy. Because sometimes you'll think something's not working, and maybe if you shifted your efforts to some other part of the outreach process. So in today's case, the real world example of this, student shifted his effort to list building instead of focusing on copy A/B iteration. And that was the thing that was a huge unlock from like 1 client every couple weeks to 2 clients every week. So let's dive in. So before we talk about this sort of counterintuitive process, let's first talk about what conventional wisdom says about outreach copy. So conventional wisdom, and what I would generally recommend to students in my course, is that you should target a good positive reply rate. And note that the way I personally define positive reply rate is a little bit differently than some of the sending platforms like Instantly or other outreach pros define it. Other outreach pros and Instantly often define it as a subset of your general reply rate. So they'd say, I have a positive reply rate of 33%, meaning if they got 3 replies, 1 of them was positive. To me, this is a useless way of measuring that metric because the subset of replies you get that are positive, it doesn't really tell you anything. So the way I calculate this is if I send 100 emails and 1 person replies positively, that is a 1% positive reply rate. I don't care how many replies I get saying out of office, saying no thank you, whatever. Those are not really that useful of data, especially because they're not like a reflection of your copy a lot of the time. An out of office reply is just a reflection of the time you sent it. You know, you send it in the summer, you're going to get more. But I digress. Conventional wisdom says target a good positive reply rate, and so do I. And normally, your outreach campaign is going to hinge on a few big rocks that'll drive your positive reply rate. So those big rocks are essentially the combination of how you line up niche plus problem plus email offer. So in other words, niche, me, Zach, course creator. So if you say, hey, Zach, blah, 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 you struggling with this type of thing, I can help you for free in this way. That's like those 3 things kind of combined. So if it's like, hey, Zach, saw your YouTube channel, your videos look cool, but did you know you're missing out on probably like twice as many viewers as you could be getting because you're doing something wrong with your YouTube descriptions? Happy to send you a few free tips on like how you could change your descriptions to get more visits. In that case, the problem is not as many YouTube views as I could be getting. I said visits, but I meant views. And the offer is a free audit of some tips of things you could do. And that's kind of the cold email copy. This is like a pretty standard boilerplate that just generally works well. And it's very contingent upon, like I said, the problem has to be something the niche cares about. And the offer has to be something that they believe will help with the problem that also seems valuable and easy. This is like standard stuff, not the topic of this video. When you're sending something like this, I'll typically have people target about a 2% positive reply rate as their like ideal baseline. Some people get much higher. Like I have students who get 5% plus. I sent campaigns in the past when cold email was easier, to be fair, they got like 15%. So 2% is a nice conservative thing. But what's interesting, and the basis of this video is this layout that I have on the screen now. When you carry forward the funnel metrics, which I have a little forecaster tool I made, by the way. If you go to leadtables.io/forecaster, that'll show you the campaign forecaster where you can play with conversion rates like this. I think that URL works. Let me check. Yes, it works. So this will be a cropped screen because of how I have my screen share set up. But basically, you can go here and you can play with these different percentages to see how many clients flow through. So play with that if you want. But back to it. A typical funnel at these conversion rates looks a bit like this. So your 2% positive reply rate, so 2% of the people you send emails to say, sure, send me that Loom. Of the people you send the Loom video audit to, A pretty well dialed funnel will have about a fifth of them. So 1 out of 5 booking meetings. And once you're like pretty good at making your looms, usually you can do the looms in 15 or 20 minutes, depending on the depth and stuff. And there's a lot of opportunity for automation, but these are just generalized things that I've seen. And what's kind of interesting here is that if you have to do 5 looms to get 1 meeting, and your meetings are closing at about 33%, which is pretty normal from a well-polished outbound funnel, then it means to get 1 client, you have to do 3 meetings, and importantly, 15 looms. If you have to do 15 looms at 20 minutes each, that's 5 hours just recording loom videos. And then you have to do 3 meetings, suppose they're 40 minutes each. It's a couple hours on meetings. So this puts your total like time cost per client at 7 hours. So this funnel works well. You will get clients. And if a client to you represents $5, $10, $15, $20, $100,000, of course you will happily spend 7 hours. Even if a client to you is just $1,000, these clients refer other clients. They ascend into higher ticket offers. You can have a retainer on the back of your intro offer. There are a bunch of cases where the 7 hours is a perfectly fine price to pay to get a client. But I want to show you how it compares to this at a glance kind of crappy funnel and show you where we can see those payoffs when we look at it from this time and energy perspective. So today's counterintuitive strategy kind of flips everything on its head, and it looks at a glance like it sucks. I would call this copy strategy, funnel strategy, something like the solution aware straight to call funnel, something along those lines. Basically, the thing that makes this is that it leans into the concept of demand capture more so than demand generation. So most outreach, like the one I mentioned before, is what's called demand generation. You say, hey, Zach, do you want this result? More YouTube views. If so, here are some problems that you could fix. So this email, it's essentially like, it's making somebody aware of an issue that maybe they didn't know existed before. Whereas demand capture would be something like trying to find people who are already trying to solve the problem. Like, hey, Zach, are you already, I don't know, A/B testing your video description text? If so, I can help you with that. Something along those lines. And so if you think about like classic freelancer acquisition, most classic freelancer client getting strategies are demand capture. Upwork is demand capture. Referrals are demand capture. These are all situations where people have a concept in mind for a project and reach out to you. And the nice thing about demand capture is the close rates are higher. The downside of demand capture is the per hour rates tend to be lower because it's more of like commoditized tasks. They know the shape of the project. They just need someone to like hit their freelancer hammer against it. And thus it's a little bit lower value. But nonetheless, you can still build a very profitable business around it, and it's way easier to close. So in this case, the vibe looks a bit more like this. So the vibe / template is like, starts off pretty much the same way as the other one. Like, hey, saw your YouTube channel. But then where it shifts says like, can you relate to the presence of this problem? Or can you relate to trying to solve this problem? And then importantly, another line that is like, most of my clients hire me because they painful situation. And then the CTA is not for an asynchronous lead magnet. It's for a chat. I'll share in a couple minutes the like things to do really well if you're going to play with this. But the most important thing is that your CTA, even though it's going straight to a call, it needs to straddle this line between spammy, which is like you're asking them to hire you from a cold email. That's spammy. Don't do that. But also this other one that's like this hyper value forward at the cost of your time. We need to find the sweet spot right between the two in order for this to be really, really solid, in my opinion. So using our YouTube channel, this could be like, hey, Zach, saw your YouTube channel. Curious if you relate to, well, hold on, let me think. I'll think of a better one. So here's probably how I do it for the YouTube example. It'd be like, hey, Zach, saw your YouTube channel. Curious if you've ever thought about A/B testing your video descriptions to get more views. I just did this for blah, blah, blah client name, and they doubled their clients. They doubled their views. Most of my clients come to me when they are really dialed in on making content, but they feel like they're not getting as much mileage out of it as they should. Or maybe just delete that line because I just did this for blah, 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 and I doubled their views. Like that kind of already hits what we need anyway, and we want our cold emails to be shorter. And then just worth a chat. And what makes that worth a chat so powerful here is that it's kind of ambiguous about like what the chat is. Like it's kind of in this gray area, like it's kind of a sales call, because we talk about most of my clients hire me for this, but it's also valuable because I can share some tips. Like, we have to keep it straddling that line in order for this to not push it too much one way or the other. Because if you say, do you want to jump on a chat where I give you all this free advice? Then you might see that your meeting close rates drop because people just come for the freebie. If you push it towards this side, like want to jump on a sales call to see if you want to hire me, then your spam complaints will probably increase. People call you spammer. Your booking rates will decrease because it doesn't feel like you're giving anything of value. So we need to make it clear you get valuable stuff, and this is in the context of you hiring me to do shit for you. That's the sweet spot, in my opinion. So all that said, I have a student running this right now, and he is getting a 0.6% positive reply rate, which at a glance seems bad, seems worse. It's less than a third of what I would typically have students target. But what gets really interesting is when you look at a little further down the funnel than the positive reply. So these are the stats that his funnel breaks down into. And it's the way that it pays off the most in my mind, from the standpoint of time ROI and also energetic ROI. So because all the calls that get booked from a funnel like this are kind of in the context of like understanding this is a thing this person is hired for, and we're talking about it in that context, your close rates on the calls will be higher. So in the case of the student running this, his close rates are about 50% for a relatively low-priced intro project, like at or around $1,000. And this project becomes a more expensive project later and becomes retainers later. So that's like his core strategy. But importantly, because there's no asynchronous lead magnet to fulfill first, and because the meetings themselves are in this hiring context, he's seeing some really cool metrics. First off, higher meeting close rate. So he's closing about half of the meetings into clients versus the normal 1/3 or so. And a third is often high. Sometimes it's like 20 or 25% if your leads aren't very qualified. He's also getting a pretty high meeting booking rate. He's converting a third of those positive replies into booked meetings, which makes sense because the cold email is literally saying, do you want to book a meeting? So most of the people who reply positively should be interested in booking meetings, since that's the whole thing. And where this is a pretty cool comparison to look at is that this funnel's total time per client is looking more like 90 minutes. You don't do any real lead nurturing in advance. You just, whatever questions they ask in the email, and then you go to the calls. So you just go to 2 calls, you get a client, versus scenario A where you spend 7 hours working on lead magnets and stuff like that. And for me personally, as a neurodivergent person with ADHD, I really like this less from that time standpoint, though that is a part of it, but also just from like the energetic standpoint. Having to shoot these lead magnets, like that's tedious, repetitive work. Don't like that. Having to go on a bunch of sales calls, don't really like that. I would much rather take that time expense and shift it into work that I find more fun and easy to do. So in this case, list building, because if you're getting lower positive reply rates and stuff, you need to compensate with more leads. So you either spend more time on list building or you spend time on lead magnets to have the same like net throughput. And I would rather shift that time into list building. So a few things I want to share before we hop off, if you're thinking of playing with a strategy like this, or just some kind of things to be aware of for the context, pitfalls, etc. So first off, as I said at the very beginning, conventional wisdom has you target positive reply rates. And I still think that's a really good place to start, even if you want to play it with something like this, if you're totally new or somewhat new to cold email. The reason being, like when I'm first scaffolding out a new funnel, I always like to build it around what do I think will get the most initial funnel throughput. So in other words, the most clients from the fewest leads. Doesn't matter how much time it takes, how effortful it is, like we just need to get some data flowing through this funnel. And the reason I personally like this approach is that if you send 1,000 cold emails and you get 0 replies, you don't really have any basis for iteration because you don't have any data to iterate against. And so I always try to get that first set of replies, get that first positive reply rate tracked so that I actually know, is this 0.6% compared to 2%, compared to 4%, compared to 5%, or compared to whatever? Who knows? You'd have to check first. So that's one little note. Another note is that this strategy, in my mind, is only viable or is primarily viable if you have a large TAM, total addressable market, aka leads. So if you're targeting something broad like small businesses, or even narrower than that, like let's say any kind of small business that's relatively broad. So like imagine restaurants, dentists, plumbers. If your niche is something like that, you've got a bazillion leads. Doesn't matter. If you're targeting something broad like ecom or SaaS, you've got a bazillion leads. Where this doesn't really work is like I have a CRO agency I ran in the past where I needed to target course creators with over 100,000 visitors a month and over $1 million in revenue. And every time I went to go get leads for this, it was very, very difficult to get a very small number of leads. And so a strategy like this, where you're kind of burning leads, only makes sense if it's easy for you to get a lot of leads. So that's one thing I wanted to flag. And then a couple things I mentioned earlier that I just want to highlight and underline here are that you should not be sending spam. Don't send cold emails asking somebody to do something for you. You are emailing strangers here. Successful cold email, even with a strategy like this, is built on trust and value delivery. So whatever you do, the core goal is always still offer something valuable and free to the prospect. And in this case, the thing we're offering for free is just a little bit of free consulting. But we're doing that in a context where they understand that we also have a paid offer attached to it. That's like the thing that makes this. And then finally, when you're running a strategy like this that is a little bit more straddling that line between value and spam, it's even more important to do all of the core deliverability stuff that makes or breaks cold email campaigns really well. And this includes placement tests and stuff. Don't have time to go into that here. It's a whole process. It's a lot of what my 200K freelancer course focuses on. And it's very hard to do right. So keep that in mind. Like, this isn't some magic bullet. This is just something to play with and a new way to look at your campaigns. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you want more stuff like this, subscribe to the channel and you'll get updated on new videos from me. And I also have this little masterclass I made. It's not really that little. It's a pretty deep dive, in fact, called Build the Business, Not the Job. If you're a service provider wanting to own your acquisition and build like a scalable asset versus just running in a hamster wheel, I think you'd really enjoy it. You can join it for free at doubleyourfreelancing.com/buildthebusiness. Probably I've got a short link. Let me check. Yes, I do. Wow, thanks, Past Zach. So dyf.link/scale is where you can type that more easily. So thanks for being here and see you in the next one.